revive. Lost in our sin, you made us alive. How can we ever hold you inside? We can't hold back. We're gonna lift you high, high. Hearts burning bright like a fire, fire. Voices unite, making louder and louder. Never gonna stop singing. Oh, we're never gonna stop. High, high. Hearts burning bright like a fire, fire. Voices unite, making louder and louder. Never gonna stop singing. Oh, we're never gonna stop singing. Come on, put your hands together. Every tribe, every tongue, every heart will sing. Every knee we will bow to the risen King. Lift him up, never gonna stop singing. Oh, we're never gonna stop. Every tribe, every tongue, every heart will sing. Every knee we will bow to the risen King. Lift him up, never gonna stop singing. Oh, we're never gonna stop. High, high, hearts burning bright like a fire, fire. Voices unite, making louder and louder. Never gonna stop singing. Oh, we're never gonna stop. High, high, hearts burning bright like a fire, fire. Voices unite, making louder and louder. We're never gonna stop singing. Oh, we're never gonna stop singing. Yeah, Jesus.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Encounter Church. My name is Jason. I'm a pastor on staff here, and we are so glad that you are here. By your clap, by your energy, I think you're glad that you're here as well, aren't you? All right, listen, this is winter break, and so maybe some folks are joining us from Disney World or maybe even Disneyland, because that's what you do when you walk through Disney World, right? They got their phone on them watching church. But I know folks are engaged with us online, so we want to say we're glad that whether you listen to the podcast or you're listening through even Facebook Live right now, we're glad that you're here. We're glad that you're engaging with us as well. If you're a first-time guest, you may have received a handout when you walked in the door. There's a little tear-off slip. If you fill that out, and towards the very end, at the end of the service, before you walk out, you stop by Starting Point, hand that to us. We have a gift for you. We would love to meet you at that time as well. We're going to sing a few more songs together, and you're going to sing a note to the top of your lungs, and by the end of the service, your voice is going to be gone. And then our pastor is going to come and continue a series that we started just a few weeks ago. And we believe that because you are here, that you will encounter God. So once again, thanks for being here. Let's continue to sing together.
Now the darkness fades into new beginnings as we lift our eyes to a hope beyond. All creation waits with an expectation to declare the reign of the Lord our God. We will not be moved when the earth gives way. For the risen one is overcome, and for every fear there's an empty grave. For the risen one is overcome. Now the silence breaks in the name of Jesus, as the heavens cry, let the earth respond. All creation shouts with the voice of triumph to declare the reign of the Lord our God. We will strongholds now surrender for the Lord. Our God has overcome. Who can be against us? Jesus, our defender, He is Lord, and He has overcome. He shall reign forever. Strongholds now surrender for the Lord. Our God has overcome. Who can be against us? Jesus, our defender, He is Lord, and He has overcome. We will not be moved when the earth gives way, for the reason one is overcome. And for every fear, there's an empty grave, for the reason one is overcome. We will not be moved when the earth gives way, for the reason one is overcome. And for every fear, there's an empty grave, for the reason one is overcome. Caught up in your presence, I just wanna sit here at your feet. I'm caught up in this holy moment. I never wanna leave. Oh, I'm not here for blessings. Jesus, you don't owe me anything more than anything that you can do. I just want you. And I'm sorry when I've just gone through the motions. I'm sorry when I just sang another song. And take me back to where we started. I open up my heart to you. And I'm sorry when I've come with my agenda. I'm sorry I forgot that you're enough. Take me back to where we started. I open up my heart to you. Caught up in your presence, yeah. I just wanna sit here at your feet. I'm caught up in this holy moment. I never wanna leave. Sing this with me. Oh, I'm not here for blessings, yeah. Jesus, you don't owe me just want you. Nothing else. Nothing else. Nothing else will do. I just want you. Nothing else. Nothing else. Nothing else will do. Let's make this our prayer. I just want you. Nothing else. Nothing else. Nothing else will do. I just want you. Nothing else. Nothing else, Jesus. Nothing else will do. I just want you. Nothing else. Nothing else. Nothing else will do. I just want you. Nothing else. Nothing else. Nothing else will do. I just want you. Nothing else. Nothing else, Jesus. Nothing else will do. Caught up in your presence. Sing it out. I just caught up in this holy moment. Never wanna leave. I'm not here for blessings. Jesus, you don't owe me anything more than anything that you can do. I just want you. You may be seated. Enjoy the show.
Good morning. Welcome to Encounter Church. My name is Chris Causey. I'm the pastor here. And I'm so glad that you've chosen to join us as we continue our series, Love, Dates, and Heartbreaks. In 2009, some researchers in Vanderbilt University of Georgia published a study. They had put some men in functional MRI machines, which allows them to see like real time how the brain is responding. And after they placed these men in these functional MRIs, they invited in their wives. And the wives were directed to have a series of types of conversations with them, building up to a point where the wives were asked to give them advice. As the wives were beginning to engage in conversation, they noticed the shift from where brain activity was when they were just talking about normal things to, by the time it landed, when the women were beginning to give advice to their husband. And what they noticed was that it shifted from listening to a section of the brain that begins to question people's motives, thus confirming what all women have known for all of humanity, that essentially that husbands do not listen to advice when given to them by their wife. That study actually proved it. You've had that suspicion for a while. Now you have science to back you up, right? And so for the rest of those guys' lives, they just were, every time, they got into a conversation and she's like, hey, I'd like to give you some advice. She'd just hold up the picture of the image of their brain scan and says, like, is this you right now? Is this what you're doing? Because your face is telling me you're not listening to me right now, right? And which is kind of an interesting and obvious thing that happens in relationships. But what's fascinating to me, and what was kind of an impetus for me early on after I became a Christian, when I started to imagine love and dating and marriage and all of that, was that I wanted to make sure I did it right. Because there seems to be a general pattern that most people make relationship decisions that undermine the relationships that they're in. Most people make relationship choices that actually undercut the foundation of the relationship they're already in. Whether it's these men not listening to advice, or whether it's in the small interactions and the little jabs and one-liners and zingers, or in the cold shoulders or the passive aggressiveness. And that a few weeks ago, we kicked off this whole series with saying that there's two myths that kind of undergird a lot of these relationship decisions and choices that undermine our relationships. The first one is the right person myth, which is this idea that once you meet the right person, everything will be all right. And that's pretty much the storyline of most romantic comedies, right? They meet, there's a little bit of relational tension in the middle. Someone is always leaving to go somewhere, whether it's on a plane, a train, a donkey, an automobile, and the person realizes right before the moment that they're about to leave, and then it's usually a really dramatic, no one just calls an Uber and catches them the day before. It's always like right before they're going to go through customs, or right before they're signing the contract. But it always ends with that moment, and they're all right, and they live happily ever after. Because once you find the right person, you're all right. But that's not how it works. It's a myth. And we fantasize about that right person. We dream about that right person. But none of us fantasize about becoming the right person that the other person you're looking for is looking for. And the second myth that undercuts is the promise myth, which is this idea that if I have a promise and a party, that's all I need. We put so much time, energy, and effort. Unfortunately, as a pastor and kind of sit on the other side of couples getting married, that one of the things that's heartbreaking for me is that I watch couples put more energy, time, and money in the day than all the days that follow it. They spend more money and time, they spend more energy thinking about and planning for the details of that day than all the other days that come after it. And that this idea that if I've got the right person and I make the promise and we have a good party, that it's enough. And yet those two myths rob us of the future. Because what happens when you say I do is it makes you accountable. When you stand across an altar and say I do to someone, you're now accountable. But if you're not capable, you eventually end up miserable. And if you spend time in misery for long enough, your I do eventually becomes I'm done. In Death Valley National Park, the rangers have a saying for this pattern that they've noticed in the last 15 years. See, what happens is Death Valley is a massive, sprawling, hot place with temperatures upwards of 115 degrees. And people, because it's vastness, they like to explore. And so they put in different locations in their GPS because they've never been there before. They end up blindly following each turn, each direction. And they've had it happen so often where people blindly following the GPS end up in places where they've run out of gas because they're not near a gas station, or their car runs hot because they're in 115-degree blazing hot sun, middle of the day. And they end up perishing out in the middle of the desert. And these park rangers, because it's happened so frequently, they now just call it death by GPS. And the idea that I think in our culture and in the culture of the backdrop of the passage I want to look at today, that we experience relational death by GPS. That we kind of just follow the patterns and the turn signals that the culture around us gives us, and in the end, we end up experiencing relational death. People's I do's become I'm done. And this culture that we live in is not too much different than the culture of the church in Corinth almost 2,000 years ago. You have to realize that there's even some direct connections for us. In fact, a little bit of Roman Greek history. So Corinth's in Greece, in the Greek area, influenced by the Greek way of thinking. The Roman Empire conquers, but because the Romans never had a deep infrastructure and philosophy and system of they just robbed it all from the Greeks. And so the Roman kind of empire took the Greek gods and they just renamed them. They just took them, renamed them, and said, oh, these are our gods. So the Greek god for love was Eros, E-R-O-S. Which is actually the base of the word where we get our word for erotic, actually. Erotic comes from Eros, which was the Greek word, the name for the Greek god of love. The Romans, wanting to look original, said, well, we're not going to say our Greek god of love is, our Roman god of love is Eros. So they renamed him Cupid. Okay? So every time you see that little chubby baby with incontinence issues, zooming around with its little bow and arrow, you're actually witnessing a direct tie to thousands and thousands of years old mythology. But Eros and Cupid were the same. What marked both of them, and is still even present in the imagery of Cupid, was Eros and Cupid originally were far more handsome. They weren't chubby little babies. They were skilled hunters, which is why you see the bow and arrow still present in Cupid's hand. The idea was that Eros, or Cupid, they were skillful hunters. They would track down the object of their infatuation, and when they weren't looking, they would hit them and capture them, and they would become their prey. Right? Which is like such a romantic storyline. I saw her, I shot her with an arrow, and then I drug her back to my cave. But that is, in essence, the storyline of Eros. I mean, if you think back through, I was doing this week, and I was like, this is so stupid, but I just kept chuckling. I was in a coffee shop, and I was laughing to myself. Because if you go and you look at some of the love songs that are popular today, you see this still present, right? This objectification, this infatuation, this fixation, this idea of the hunter and the prey. And so I was changing the word you in songs to taco. And so I was just singing popular love songs and replacing taco. And so it's I'm in love with the shape of tacos. You know, my bed sheets smell like tacos. And I was like, that probably would need a doctor. I'm pretty sure. But I was just sitting there. I was like, we live in a culture that has reduced love to an objectification and to just this erotic layer. And that's it. Love songs are often predicated on the way you make me feel. I don't know if you've ever noticed this, but love songs are some of the most self-centered, me-oriented songs out there. I mean, every once in a while, you'll get one that's like, girl, I'll climb a mountain for you. And I'll look at my wife and be like, sweetheart, I will walk up a moderately inclined hill for you. If it's a big mountain, then we got other because why do you want me to go to the top of that mountain in the first place? That ain't okay, right? I'll wear floaties and I'll doggy paddle across a small pond for you. But if you want me to swim across an ocean, I just think you want me to die because you both know we're going to drown, right? Every once in a while, you'll get those kind of songs, but most of the songs are oriented towards me and the way you make me feel and the way you shake your hips and what they do to my hips when it happens, right? Most of the songs are all about me. Which is not too much different from what these people were experiencing. They had a very self-centered, me-oriented way of living. life and thinking about love in general. And so Paul writes this letter effectively answering foreigners' question 1900 years before they ever ask what love is. And he outlines in 1 Corinthians chapter 13 a series of answers to the question of what is love. Because he recognizes that they have operated off the wrong framework of love. They're taking their cues from what to do from Cupid, which in the end doesn't build a solid relationship. It just builds a wall of trophies, of people that you've captured, people that you've won over, and that people you moved on from. And so Paul writes in the beginning of 1 Corinthians 13, which is kind of an interesting chapter. If you were actually to spend time studying, you'll see 12 and 14. Initially, you're like, this is so random. Why 13? Because 13 is a bit of a rabbit trail. But what's happening is that the entire book leading up to chapter 13, he's noticed this tendency. They don't understand love. So he's, instead of just giving them direction, he was like, I'm going to explain what love is, because I think you guys don't know. And so he begins with probably some of Paul's most famous words in human history. In fact, most people, if they've never even heard of Christianity, they've probably heard a quote, because this may be the most famous writing that's ever been written on love. It begins with the phrase, love is patient, love is kind. It does not envy, it does not boast, and it is not proud. It does not dishonor others, it is not self-seeking, it is not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, it always trusts, it always hopes, and it always perseveres. These beautiful words written about love. But the challenge is that we're reading this 2,000 years. We're reading it in English, and we're missing the language of the day that Paul wrote in, which was actually the Greek language, which is that tie over in the Roman Empire. And so what Paul does is he does something interesting, where in the English, we read love is patient, love is kind. We see an adjective. We see something describing love. But Paul's not writing adjectives. In the text, in the actual manuscripts and the copies that we have, in the original language, Paul actually writes verbs, not adjectives. The challenge is that it's really hard in the English to do what Paul is writing. We don't have a language structure that allows us to take love and turn it into a verb. But the actual language structure is like love, verb, love, verb. And then he gets to the not sections, and it's like love, not verb, love, not verb, love, not verb. But then he uses an even special word for love, because the Greeks had multiple words for love. You had eros, which was the erotic, romantic love. You had another love that was like the brotherly love. But then you had this word agape, which is the word that's often associated with God when he says love. And agape was this unconditional, I got your back, fully committed type of love. And so he says agape verb, agape not verb, agape not verb. Now what's fascinating, what jumps out when you read this is you realize that this entire section is filled with 15 verbs to communicate the essence of what love is. That love is an action. It is something in motion. It's not just emotion. But for most of us, when we think about love, when we listen to songs about love, when we imagine love, we think about feelings. But Paul, out the gate, says love is about action and motion, not emotion and feeling. And I don't have time to go through all 15. Actually, Life Group this week, one of the things they're doing is they're going to press into this passage a little bit deeper, because there's so much inside of this. I'm just going to pick a couple of them to highlight the theme of what Paul's getting at for us to kind of press into initially. He begins with saying love is patient. And again, patience is a verb. So he's kind of pushing us to this image of love that's an active patience. Saying love isn't pushy. That the timer, the stopwatch for love, actually, and the way that this word is used around the New Testament scriptures, is that The stopwatch is determined for what's best for the person, not the impatience of the one doing it. That patience isn't you sitting there looking like this. Like, we need to go, we got to get out of here. That love isn't a pushy. Its pace is being set by the person on the other side. That love's patience is focused on what's best for them, not for you. This other-centeredness comes out immediately. That love chooses to move at the other's pace. I have an 8-year-old girl whose pace is radically different from mine. My pace is of someone who's always late for the next thing that he's supposed to be at. I'm always walking fast. I'm always pushing quickly. And one of the greatest gifts that ever happened to me was I had an 8-year-old named Ella, who, if I'm not careful, I will leave her as we walk through anywhere, because the pace that she moves is so much slower. And yet every time that she's and I am together, I have to engage my gear shift and throw it down to a lower gear, because that in that moment is me modeling what patience looks like. That not a dragging, not a pushing, not a pressuring. Where this looks like practically in a romantic relationship, to kind of go ahead and jump into that world, right? That love is patient means that the pace of the relationship isn't being you pushing a person past where they want to go, or you pushing the speed of the relationship beyond the pace that they can handle. Now, I'm not saying if they got a fear of commitment, that's a different issue, right? As the prophetess Beyonce says, sometimes you got to put a ring on it. I'm not saying that. But I'm saying that patience says that their pace, not my pace, is the pace that we're going to move at. That's what the picture of patience looks like. That he continues and he says, love is kind, which is probably one of the most creative moments in this entire passage. It's one that you can skip over. Kind is a short word, but kind is actually, it's kind of cool for those word nerds. Paul actually invents the word for kindness. In the Greek language, it had never happened. And Paul invents the word for the verb kindness, because kindness had never been used as a verb before. And Paul makes up a word, because he's so committed to trying to convey and to put explicitly in an explanation what love looks like. And he says that it's the action of kindness. That is, kindness for some of us, oftentimes when we think of kindness, we envision it, we kind of picture this soft-spoken or maybe weak or timid individual. But kindness is the exact opposite of that. Kindness is an incredible thing. Kindness is actually an expression of strength, because here's what kindness is. Kindness is loaning someone your strength rather than reminding them of their weakness. I want to say that one more time, because this is really, really, really profound. Kindness is loaning someone your strength instead of reminding them of their weakness. I watch my wife do this quite frequently. I think she's really good at it. Whenever in our household or with some of your children, in fact, because Jenny runs the preschool area, when a kid comes up and they're in a moment of weakness, what I watch my wife do is that she will drop to her knees and that she will slow her pace. She will lower her voice. And in a moment, she loans the kids her strength. It's this incredible thing. I just kind of stand in awe of it every time she does it. Because what the typical pattern is in our culture is when we see someone's weakness, we actually want to bring it up. We want to highlight it. We want to emphasize it. We want to make a point so that they don't miss it. And what kindness does is it does for others in the moment what they can't do for themselves. And it's a display of strength. It's love's response to others' weakness. That's the essence of kindness. And here's the reality, is that for most of us, we don't even think about the word kindness. We don't think about that as we're dating. But what kindness does is kindness, instead of saying, well, they need to hear this, I need to get this off my chest. Kindness says, no, is this for their best? And if it's not for their best, then I need to let it rest. I'm just going to let it go. That kindness, if you're dating someone, I would encourage you, pay attention to when they interact with someone in a moment of weakness. Pay attention when they interact with someone who is kind of a lesser than they are in their perceived hierarchy of the world. Because when you're dating someone, you actually get their best behavior. I don't know if you know that, right? When you're dating someone, it's not a preview of what's to come. It's really like the best selective edit. Like, if you ever watched a movie and the preview was really good, and then you watch the movie and you realize the preview was better than the movie, like that's dating, okay? You're getting their best behavior. You're getting their intentional effort to deceive you and to highlight all the good things that they have in store for you. Okay, you're not getting them squeezing the toothpaste in the middle. You're not getting them leaving their underwear on the floor. You're getting them behaving on their best. And what you need to do is you want to pay attention to people they don't have to be on their best behavior for. Are they kind in those moments? Do they reflect kindness then? Because people who are kind just as a means to an end, as a way of manipulating or kind of tricking you, in the end, they are typically mean people. If the only time you see kindness is to get something out of you, then in the end, what you find is that they typically are mean. And I have watched relationships, not just romantic relationships, but I have watched relationships destroyed by unkindness. It is such a demoralizing, demeaning thing to be around someone who's unkind. And Paul makes it his second point because he knows how critical kindness is. And then Paul moves into what you could call his toxic trio, right? He says that love does not boast, it is not proud, it does not envy. He's kind of walking through a series of these damaging things. He says it's that love allows the other person to shine. Love can celebrate other people's successes, even when you're not succeeding. Love doesn't get wrapped up. Actually, when he says the word boast, it's actually a really interesting word. It's an image of blowing up something and inflating a balloon. So someone who's boastful or is bragging, they have a big head. And people with big heads tend to be bothered by other people who have big heads, which is normally a pretty clear indication it's going to be a struggle down the road. But typically, people who have an inflated self don't celebrate when other people are in the spotlight. And I wrote down the line, which is so cheesy, but I was like, sometimes you're Beyonce, and then sometimes you're the backup singers in Destiny's Child, right? Like sometimes in life, you're the person on the stage and you got the microphone and you've got the solo and it's all about you and you're hitting those notes and everyone's clapping and cheering. And then sometimes you're the person in the back with the egg shaker and no one even knows you're on the stage. And they even give you a microphone. You're just there shaking. And that great relationships that demonstrate love is an awareness that sometimes you're the egg shaker and sometimes you're the vocalist, but you do them both with equal passion. And so who's your favorite person to brag on? Is it you? Are you comfortable celebrating other people's successes even when you feel like you're failing? Because when you get practical, this is what love looks like. Love is an intentional celebration of someone, even when your circumstances aren't winning ones. And that this is kind of that summation. There's so much word, like I said, Paul takes each one of these words, has so much richness and meaning, but I have a limited amount of time. The next thing that he does, which we'll end it on this piece before I go into the conclusion, is this next phrase where he says, love does not dishonor others. And this is another one of those words because it's an interesting word. In our culture, honor is not something that necessarily bubbles up to our mind. But when Paul says to not dishonor, the word honor means like imagine you walk into Target or one of your favorite stores this afternoon, and you walk up to an item and you see that it has a price tag. So this idea of honor is essentially recognizing that the price tag is set by someone else and not you. And that you exchange, that you treat that item like the price tag it has, not the price tag you think it should have. And so if you see something that you think is worthless, if someone else has put a price tag on that thing that's so much bigger than what you would, that you treat it and you honor it with the value that it already has. So when he's saying do not dishonor, what he's essentially saying is he's saying treat people better than how you think you should be treated. Give them a higher price tag than what you would give yourself. Now, Paul is a Christian and he's writing out a Christian worldview, which means that Paul recognizes that because of who Jesus is and what Jesus has done, that the price tag of every single man, woman, and child, regardless of where they come from, regardless of what they've done, regardless of the nationality and the gender and all of that, regardless of any of those things, every single person walking on planet Earth has a price tag that hangs off of them that says priceless. And when you understand honor, it means even if someone is willing to be mistreated, you don't mistreat them. Some people, unfortunately, have grown up being mistreated, and they have taken the mistreatment that they've received and they've allowed it to stamp their price tag. But I'm just saying, men and women, listen to me. If you're in a relationship and you are treated less than, you are not being honored. And you get the best right now. And so if someone mistreats you, I don't care what you think your price tag is, walk away. It is just not okay. Because honor calls us to treat people better than what we'd even treat ourselves. Now, are they actually more valuable than you? No, you're the same price. But honor is about you doing that intentionally. I remember right after my wife and I got married and we were returning something back, because when you go through the engagement period, especially with us, you just you follow the culture's pattern, which was hey, you know what you need? You need really fancy dishware. You need china. And so you need china that's really nice. And so we registered for china, that, plates with little silver things on it. And the entire time we're walking around, I'm like, why do we need this stuff? Well, this is what people do. They, you buy china. It's oh, there's a gravy pourer. I'm we don't even need gravy. Why do we need a gravy pourer? But it's well, no, that's what you do. And so after we got married, we realized that people bought us ridiculously expensive plates and gravy pourers, and we don't eat gravy. And so we're taking them back and exchanging them for real things that we actually need, like towels and real plates and forks and knives and cups, not chalices that look like they came from King Arthur's table. And so, I'm standing in line, and as we're standing there, this guy, his wife walks off from him. And then my wife named Jenny, she's hey, I'm going to go look for some of the items to, when you get the credit, I'm going to go find the items that were placed. I'm okay, cool. So as she walks away, this older gentleman turns around and looks at me, and he makes this snide comment about his wife. It's really just mean statement, which, and I get it's the source of laughter in sitcoms, right? To put down and to tear down and to make fun of your significant other. But as I'm sitting there and this guy is railing on his wife, and I guess because he felt like his wife and my wife did the same thing, which was going shopping, he thought I would lean into it with him. And so I'm sitting there and this guy is talking about this woman, and in my head, I have two different thoughts happening. One is I'm dude, I bet you won't say that to her face. Because I watched you 3 minutes earlier and you're yes, ma'am. So I'm pretty sure she comes back and I'm oh, you're the nag he was talking about. Nice to meet you. Yeah, he said you're a battle axe. You're just like your mom. Oh, I'm sorry. I wasn't supposed to tell her that. Right. I'm in my head, one, dude, you're a chicken. Okay. First of all, I know that. Because you're yes, ma'am, to her earlier. But two is I, in my heart, was made a solemn pact. I mean, it was if I could have summoned all of the glorious creatures of the universe to like, I solemnly swear on this day and forevermore that I will never speak of my wife the way this fool just spoke of his. I mean, it was like, I don't want to downplay it, but in my heart, I mean, it was that serious. I said, no one on planet Earth will ever hear me speak about my wife the way this guy just spoke about his. Period. Because like I wanted to hit that guy. Because I felt like he'd so dishonored his wife. And here's someone who stood across an altar, who had said the words through like the best and the worst, through sickness and in health. And I'm like, dude, you said all those things to her, and you're here to make a return, and it doesn't even hold up. Like, there are far worse things in life than having to stand in line at a department store to return an item. And I can honestly say no living human being has ever heard me say anything negative about my wife. Period. You will never. In fact, I will confidently say if you ever see a video of me saying something negative about my wife, it is one of them fake videos that somebody's done turned like my face and put it on, you know, like when it's like the funny ones, but it won't be funny because it'll be me saying something about my wife. You'd be like, that's fake video. He swore to the universe he'd never do that. I know that's not true. Because I think this is so important when it comes to relationships. That I made a promise that day I would be her biggest cheerleader and champion. Look, we're surrounded by people who are always trying to take that Sharpie out and cut through and call us clearance and mark us down and put us 30% off. We are surrounded by people who will gladly erase and relabel the price tag placed on you. But I swore that day that I will never, ever allow anyone to touch my wife's price tag with their Sharpie. That I will be her cheerleader, I will be her champion, I will be her supporter. I'll be the manager that comes up at the front when there's a conflict about the actual price. I'll be like, no, that thing's not on clearance. Here's the real value, because it ain't okay. And you may say, well, Chris, I think you're being a little overreactive to this man. No, here's what I understand. See, I didn't grow up with a good picture of this. And so much of what I'm saying today is not from me. It's what I have gotten out of the Bible through the lives of just a handful of men who've modeled this for me, who've taught me what it looks like, because I didn't know what it looked like. And that I recognize that if I love my wife, like one day she will leave me, then I never have to wake up fearing that she will. If I love my wife, and I promise to love those around me, my kids, my friends, my family members, with the realization that one day their hand will slip out of mine. That if I love people for a small time, then I never have to fear the day. I never have to worry about being the source of regret for them. And that I believe we should leave people better than how we found them. That we should leave people better than how we found them. And then that is what it means to honor. Because here's what I honestly know, and why I make a big deal out of the honor piece, is that my wife is surrounded by all the evidence she needs to justify leaving me. My wife is surrounded with all the evidence that she needs to justify me not measuring up. If she wants to point to how I leave my underwear on the floor, which is true, I confess, somehow I lack the ability to move it from here to the 3 feet to there, where, you know, like the struggle is real. Right? Like, if she wants to look for justification that I'm a sloppy mess who would be living under a bridge, sucking on a bouillon cube without her, like, she has all the justification in the world. Like, we even have a running joke, which is kind of a morbid joke, but I'm like, you know, like, if I died, you'd be okay, but if you died, it'd be really scary. Like, I think I'd be like probably quickly homeless. Because she's just so stable and secure and like, you know. And I know that she has all the justification already. And that if you're in a relationship with someone, you have all the justification you need to stay. And you have all the justification to leave. And honor says, I'm going to look for the best. I'm going to look for what's there, what's admirable. Because most of us want to say, well, it started off good, but then, it went bad. And it's like, no. Everything that you hate about them now was probably there when you just couldn't get enough of them. You used to think it was adorable how they just seemed to not be organized. You used to think it was adorable that they always showed up a little frazzled and a little out of mess. Like, you used to think that was adorable. Now it's driving you insane. You want to stab them while they sleep. But that used to be the thing you would just laugh at and chuckle when they walked in and they're like, oh, I forgot it was Thursday. And they showed up late for the date. You're like, oh, they're such a free spirit. Yeah, look at them. They're so spontaneous. And now you're mad because they won't plan vacation this year. You used to think the way they would just surprise you with gifts was fun. The way they'd spend their money excessively on you. And now you're irritated because you're drowning in credit card debt. See, the thing with honor is that it's an intentional choice to see the best. It doesn't mean that you're naive, no. I know my wife, I'm sure, has some weaknesses. I just haven't found them yet. And I'm not going to look for them. I know I have a lot of weaknesses. But my wife is kind and she doesn't remind me of them frequently. And what happens is that kind of relationship, it starts to do something. It starts to shape you. It starts to make you. And the reason all this matters is that Paul's words can either be source of a guard or it can be a guide. If you're not married yet, it's a guard for you. If you don't see in them now a picture of who you want to be with, like, you're getting the best. If you don't see someone committed to these character traits, that I don't care how good they smell. I don't care how good they look. I don't care how good they shake them hips. Walk away. If you give, and they take and take and take, then run while you can. Because something happens when you say, I do. You become accountable to them. And that Paul could call us to this. Here's the last verse. Paul wraps up all of this. He says, when I was a child, I talked like a child. I thought like a child. I reasoned like a child. But when I became a man, I put childhood behind me. It's actually harder than that. He says, I'm done with being a child. It's far more forceful. Paul understood that when you take something that's designed for grown-ups and you give it to a child, it will appear complicated and confusing for them. If you hand a child tax software, if you hand a child your car keys, right? You hand your child, not your iPad, because they'll have that figured out better than you will, but you hand a child something that's designed for adults, and it'll look complicated. I was sick this past weekend. I'm still kind of working through it. And we were supposed to go do something. And I'm like, hey, we're going to have to go. And in my head, I know that if I tell my little girl that we're going to have to wait, that it's probably going to feel really sad for her. Because most children don't think about other people. Right? Like the mark of childhood is that they're naturally selfish. They're naturally self-centered. They're impatient. They're self-seeking. They're easily angered. They're easily distracted. They're rude. They're quick to dishonor and to tear down and put down others. Right? They are the opposite of what Paul was calling us to do in that list, which is why I think he uses this imagery. Paul was saying to the people in Corinth, and by extension to us, that there are two different ways. There is the way of Cupid, which is inherently childish, self-centered, self-seeking, all about me. And then there's the way of Christ. Because if you went through 1 Corinthians 13 and you replaced the word love for Jesus, it would still make sense. Jesus is patient. Jesus is kind. Right? Jesus is not envious. He does not boast. He does not dishonor others. That Paul had been transformed by that love that Jesus had modeled. And what he gives us in 1 Corinthians 13 is an explicit explanation of who Jesus is. Because he is love. And that the reason Paul could call them to put childish ways behind them was because God had already done for them everything that Paul was calling them to do for others. That he had been patient with them. God has been kind to them. Man, I am so gracious. I am so grateful for God's kindness to me. I'm so grateful for God's patience with me. I'm so grateful that God wasn't easily angered. He didn't lash out. And he didn't snuff out or crush when he could have. And that Paul says, look who he is. When you were rebellious, when you were, like, look, nobody had to sit a toddler down and teach him how to disobey. Like, we just step into this world knowing how to be little rebels. And yet, Paul will write in another passage that when we were still rebels, cosmic tyrants, he uses the word sinners, that God died for us. His love for us preceded our love for him. And because of who he is, we have a picture of how we can love. That because God loans us his strength in our weakness, we can give others our strength in theirs. Because God has given us forgiveness for what we've done wrong, we can give others forgiveness for what they've done that's wrong to them too. Because at the end of the day, love, as Jesus declared and as Jesus demonstrated, is an intentional leveraging of all that you have for the other's good. That it goes well beyond just good intentions, but that it's intentionally good. And so let us love like he loved. Let us love in such a way that leaves the people who call us friends, who call us co-workers, who calls us husbands and wives and mothers and fathers and brothers and sisters, sons and daughters, and every other word that could ever be applied to you. Let us love in such a way that they'll have been better because they were with us. Because that's the love that's been modeled for us. Let's pray. God, thank you that we take our cue on what to do from you. That this is so much better than what the culture declares through Cupid. That this is so much richer, deeper, life-changing, and life-giving than what's sung about in the songs on our radios and our phones. Thank you for a love that's stronger, that's not fragile, that's not weak. Help us to be people who see, who experience how you love, and help us to love like that. Thank you for what you modeled. Thank you for 1 Corinthians 13 and how you laid out a path for us so that we could walk in it. And may we as a people, as a church, as individuals, wherever we are, may we be known by our love for one another. And it's in your name, Jesus, the name that is love, that I pray. Amen. I want to thank you for being here today. Today we're going to close out with a song that's a declaration of, and really just a kind of a resting in what I just said. That who he is sets the stage. He's our cue for what to do. And that what we see him do, so will we. That's why he could say to the church, the way and what you will be known about, what you'll be known for is love. Not a weak, sentimental, feeling love that comes and goes, that goes up and down, but a love that's strong and true, a love that's got your back no matter what you do, a love that brings breakthrough and hope in every single circumstance and situation, a love that we all secretly hope that we will one day find, and a love that secretly we hope we'll one day be able to show is a love that's already been shown to us. We don't have to go look for it in someone else. God has already given it to us. So as a declaration of that, we just want to say, so will I. And that as this song is being sung and you stand and sing along, or maybe just kind of sit in the words or the lyrics, maybe for some of you, the kind of your next step today is to kind of say, you know what? Kindness, when that word got said, I realized I am not anywhere close to that. And maybe for you, it's to just think about what will kindness look like for you this week, intentionally, in some relationships. Maybe for patience for you with your kids, or that coworker who drives you insane. That you're going to choose to respond now in your head, how you're going to respond then when it happens. And that for some of us, it may be just sitting under the words of these songs and saying, God, that's true. If that's true about what you have said about me, then let it ring true in my life. Help me to see the value that you've already placed on me. And forgive me for trying to find and to build up and to label over what you've already said about me. And that as we move, if there's a way that we can pray for you, if there's a way that we can step into your journey, know that that connection card in the paper or in our app is there so that we can walk alongside of you. See, the love that Paul talked about was not a romantic love. He just talked about love in general. This is what the church is supposed to look like. And that you may notice that there are baskets being passed around. And if you're new to Encounter Church, you're like, what's up with the baskets? It's simply that, I don't know if you've noticed, but in my relationships, the people who I love the most tend to be the ones who I end up giving to. And we just believe that part of how we love is our hearts get wrapped up in it. And as a church, we are powered by people's love for Him, and that our generosity and the way that we can love our community and the way that we can create environments of love happens because people's love for Him. And that fuels the generosity. So whether you're like my family who give through the app or whether you give through the basket, know that that's what that's for. So you can just kind of keep passing it along as it comes through. And if there's a way that we can pray, that you would just drop that in there too. So I want to invite you to stand. And the band's going to lead us and declare over us the fact that there is a God who has modeled all things for us. And that may His ways be true of ours too.
Fleshed out the wonder of light. And as you speak, 100 billion galaxies are born. In the vapor of your breath, the planets form. The stars were made to so alive. I can see your heart in everything you've made. Every burning star, a signal fire of grace. Creation sings your praise. times. But what a measure could amount to your desire. You're the one who never leaves the one behind.
Thanks for being at Encounter Church today. We hope today's message inspired you and challenged you to love as Jesus loved, loving with intentionality, loving with purpose, but loving in a way that does not expect anything in return. As you leave today, feel free to stop by Starting Point. We'd love to connect with you there. I also want to remind you that on March 1st, we will have another worship and communion night. It's an amazing night filled with powerful music, communion, and a wonderful message. We'd love for you to sign up for that in the app or at Starting Point as you leave. Space is limited and there is childcare, so keep that in mind. We'd love to see you there that night, March 1st. Have a great day, and we hope to see you again next week as we continue our series. Take care.